big single entities may look like they're only designed to do tons of damage, but they're also designed to take a bunch of damage as well, which is what we're going to do with this damage soaking tactic. The ideal candidate to be a damage soak or damage sponge, whatever you want to call it, is a single entity with lots of health and lots of armor, although there is going to be a bunch of different ways that we can do this. Something like a Dread Saurian is the optimum unit for this. Now, we're not going to let it go in alone though, we're going to give it a buff of some kind to help it survive and really be effective as a soaker up of damage. So what I've done is drop Flesh to Stone upgraded on the big boy, so he's got a nice long protection of 66 physical resistance, and I waited until he walked into all the red lines that you can see there, which is the firing arcs of the dwarf units. So that physical resistance is going to reduce all damage from melee and missiles, provided they're not magical, by 66%. And look at all these lines aiming this unit down, just as we intended. The intention here is to give the enemy something they want to shoot, a big, powerful, dangerous unit, so they don't shoot the rest of my army. And something big like a Dread Saurian that can charge around and disrupt that backline as well is even better, because this all protects the incoming units. My 2 cavalry don't have to worry about being blasted by thunderers or bolt throwers, because those are all shooting at the Dread Saurian. And more importantly, it's protected my upcoming infantry, which is red-crested skinks with their armor-piercing damage. I really need them to put that armor-piercing damage on the heavily armored dwarves. If they all got shot to pieces by thunderers, they probably would have been routed before they even got to the front line, and thus my life would be a lot harder. If you are doing this with the Law of Life and Flesh to Stone, you can also use Regrowth on your damage soak to give them a lot of health back, which is just going to help them survive longer and be more effective, and in this case with the Dread Saurian, do even more damage. Or we could use Flesh to Stone again to protect the big boy if needed. The Tomb King's also pretty good at this tactic with the Kemrian War Sphinx specifically. It's big, it's got lots of armor, and in the lore of Nehekara, you've got Neru's Incantation of Protection, which you can upgrade to give a pretty long protection of 40% physical resistance to your Kemrian War Sphinx, and then he can just charge around all over the place. But our Kemrian Warboy has taken a bit of damage, about half his health already, from these strong Wood Elf missiles. There's lots of armor-piercing missiles, some Way Watchers in there as well, but he's disrupting them, and he's protecting the rest of the army. And I did bring a Necrotech here as well, which has healed our Kemrian War Sphinx once, so you got that to keep him alive as well. There's also an extra physical resistance from a nearby Necrotech that you can get, so if you can keep your Necrotech running around with your Kemrian, that's going to help him survive better as well. And the Nero's Incantation spell also has a pretty quick cooldown, so you can just keep spamming it off as soon as possible to keep your Kemrian boy protected. Of course, it can take some micro if you really want to bounce the unit around a lot, but that's usually the most powerful way to make use of this. But as we can see in this case, it has proven very useful, as our army is mostly able to win this battle while all the missiles are distracted, being pushed around by our big boy, and as he soaks up all of their ammo. There are some lords that can be good for this, Louen being probably the best one with all of his defensive abilities, such as Regeneration and the Lion's Shield, which will give him 40% missile resistance, plus you can put Flesh to Stone on him, that's another 60% physical resistance, and of course the man's even more of a beast than normal. And with the flying ability of Louen, this is great for disrupting backlines and harassing missiles, not only drawing their fire, but actually just getting into them, pushing them around, stopping them from firing, buying your units time to get up unscathed by all the missiles. And with Louen, because he has that regeneration, even if he does take some damage, he's going to recover it. If he really should get in a bad situation and suddenly loses like half his health or 3/4 of his health, you can drop a Regrowth to help save him, even though you don't really want to do that unless he has low health, because it's a bit of a waste because his regeneration will refill his health anyway. Another lord we can pull this kind of tactic with is Katarin of Kislev, but of course we could use the old elemental bear for this as well. But with Katarin, she has the Crystal Cloak, which means when she casts a spell, she gains a 20% damage resistance. So that's a nice bit of protection first of all, but she could also use the spell from the Lore of Ice, the Crystal Sanctuary, which will give her a 60% damage resistance on top of the 20 that she gets from casting a spell, so that's an 80% damage resistance. And if you most importantly put her on a bear, so she's got a lot of armor, on foot or on a horse, she's probably going to be too squishy for this, but on the bear, she's much tougher. She can be a pretty good tank. Although with the Crystal Sanctuary spell, you can't move, so she will just have to stand wherever you use that spell. But she can still be a big draw for the attention of all the enemy units, especially the missile units. As she is the Lord, she's often going to be targeted by the enemy, so she'll draw their attention and soak up a lot of their damage. We could use the bear in the same way. Here it's done at the end of the battle, but you could charge him in first, He's going to take a bit of damage on the approach because he's not going to have any extra protection, but once he gets into some kind of melee, you can use that Crystal Sanctuary to protect him. Or, I mean, you could use it before he actually gets into battle and he'll just have to stand there, but still he will be soaking up the damage pretty well. So, some options with Kislev. Now, you could try this same kind of thing with anybody, really, that has the lore of metal, but Norska here, dropping Glittering Robe, gives plus 60 armor, and Mammoths are pretty good damage soaks anyway if they've got the armor. So if you've got a metal wizard of any kind and you've got a unit that you can use as a damage soak and you feel like it's going to be useful if there's a lot of enemy missile units, this unit can take a pounding to protect the rest of the army. And we can see all the lines here lining up old Wulfric, but he's got that protection. It's not the best protection, it's not as good as damage resistance or a physical resistance, but it's something if you really need to use this tactic. If you want to disrupt the missiles and such before they destroy all of your infantry or cavalry or other monsters, it might be necessary to have your big damage soak take maybe 50% of its health in damage, because it's better to have one unit being less effective than 4 or 5 of your strongest infantries or something. But as always, I do stress, be very careful with your lord. You certainly don't want them to rout or worse die. So do assess the situation. In some cases, it may be better for your army to take 4 or 5 units of damage rather than your lord. And here's a fun one with the Greenskins and Grom. Now, the Greenskins don't have any kind of damage resistance spells or anything, but they do have the Night Shroud, a spell that will make your unit pretty much invisible until they get really close to the enemy. Now, with Grom, he does have a physical resistance ability in the Lucky Banner, so we combine those two things and we can move Grom up really close before the enemy even knows he's there, so he doesn't get shot at, he doesn't take any damage, and when he gets into melee and starts to maybe get a little bit threatened, that's when we can use his damage resistance. As I've just done, Black Dragon coming down on his head, time to protect him. He has regeneration as well, does our Grom, so he's got pretty good survivability. He can get himself out of some terrible jams pretty well. So he can just whiz around the enemy backline, push all their missiles all over the place, stop them from firing, and as you can see, my main army is completely unscathed by anything as they reach the melee combat, which is exactly what we want. So we can see all sorts of factions can pull off this kind of tactic. Usually you just need some kind of physical resistance or damage resistance that can be applied to a unit to protect them while they charge in. And it's overall optimally done by those big single entity monsters. And as a secondary choice, using a lord for the same thing can be good too, albeit a bit more risky, especially if they don't have a large health pool or armor. But here's a bunch of other lords that can pull off this same tactic. The Saurus Old Blood for the Lizard Men. He has the Amulet of Itzel, which will give him a 60% damage resistance. Whack him on a Carnosaur, and he can pull off this tactic pretty damn well. For the Beastmen, you've got Taurox, the Brass Boy, with his Brass Body ability. That'll give him a 40% damage resistance and some melee defense as well. So he could soak up a bit for your lightly armored Beastmen boys. For Khorne or the Chaos, you've got Valkyria with her Demon Shield ability, which makes her literally invulnerable, so she won't take any damage at all, but only for 13 seconds. So you need to be careful with this one. When it runs out, be cautious. She might take a lot of damage very quickly if you're not. And here's a bit of a surprise one, the Dragon-Blooded Shugengan Lord of Yang for Cathay. She has an item called Scales of the Celestial Court, which will give her a 75% physical resistance, and then there's the Jade Shield spell, which will give a 44% damage resistance. Those two things together will make her a very tanky lord, despite not having a lot of armor. Put her on a warhorse, or better yet, a Jade Longma, and you've got yourself a nice little damage soak. Without those things though, this lord is pretty squishy, so be careful when it runs out. And one last other option, Big Boy Leoncoeur has the Shadow Shroud ability, which you can't see, but it gives him a 40% damage resistance for 11 seconds. So he can act in this same way. And as you see, there's lots of different lords in different factions, so nearly all the factions can pull this tactic off in some form, some better than others naturally, but in campaign we can pull this tactic off even more effectively with items that give ward saves and things like that, or maybe physical resistances, damage resistances. You could make a lord or hero pretty damn adept at this tactic. But there we go, I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, thanks to all these lovely people, patrons and supporters of this channel. If you'd like to get your name up here and join the super secret Discord, where I talk about all secret things behind the scenes of this channel, you can check out the link for Patreon below. I'll see you in the future.